All right. See if we can get going here. Oh, what a week, eh? End of week 4, is it? 3? What week are we in? Nobody knows. We're in week 758 of COVID 2020. That's what it is. All right. So what are we going to do today? Everyone's favorite thing. I'm just going to go over some admin items first, and then because it's Friday, we get to do a creature feature. I didn't have. I looked for at least 2 or 3 hours to get a really good video, but I couldn't find one that I was happy with. But we're doing giants, the gigantes, so that should be fun and exciting. But it's a lot of photos instead of video. And then we're going to go into the readings, which I posted, I know, quite late, but they are up there now. So Xenophanes and Plato, some selections from them that we will go over and discuss. So admin stuff. The E-class has been complicated and stupid, and I'm sorry. Some of you have emailed me asking why when I clicked on this lecture did I get the wrong lecture, or why are these extra slides in here, or what's going on? That's just a result of when I was away. Things got a little messed up, and I took a lot longer. I'm still in the process of getting it all cleaned up, but largely the E-class should look proper, and things should be the thing that they are when you click on it. And the slides should largely match up with the ones that you were presented with in class. And I have been able to post quiz 3 at like late o'clock last night. So this is the quiz that was originally supposed to be posted early this week. And it is based not just on the readings from this week, but also a lot of the readings from last week. So it integrates the 2 weeks together. It's still just 10 questions, same as before. Yeah. No. It's not. It doesn't go into next week. It just makes references to some of the readings that were from last week, and then also makes references to this week. It's largely because the theogony is just so big, and you can't talk about the gods unless I'm making reference to a lot of that. So that's mostly where the crossover comes from. I have posted the videos, the audio, the slides, and the YouTube links for class 5 and 6, but 7, 8, and 9 being today, are yet to come. I have had just a host of technical issues with both 6 and 7 for a variety of different reasons, so that's in part explaining the delay. However, I believe I've solved most of them. I got 6 posted, and I will be working on 7, 8, and 9 today. So I'm really hoping that I can just get the whole works posted today, when then we're caught up, and I can have this weekend to create your reading list and post another quiz. So that should be going forward. Are there any questions? Yeah. They will be due on the same day, yes. And that's I think it's October 3rd. Any other questions based on the admin stuff or issues you've had with E-class, YouTube, whatever? Any concerns, questions, and that sort of thing? Okay, yeah, and also, I mean, I'm available via email, so if you don't want to speak up in class and you want to talk about it afterwards, I do not have an official office hour today, but I will be in my office, so if for whatever reason you want to stop by and ask some questions, that's also totally fine. All right, let's jump into the creature feature. Giants. So when you hear the name giant, what do you think? What's the first thing that jumps into your mind? Probably big, right? Giant's got to be big. That's kind of the whole point. That's what the word means. And so in a lot of our popular culture, giants are, I mean, these are just classic movies and I love movie posters, so that's why you get them. But giants are just big people. In some movies and TV shows and so on, they may be they may have different characteristics. They may like trolls or something like that. They have different colored skin or just other associated things. But more or less, they are 2 legs, 2 arms, big, and that's about it. But in the ancient world, giants have snake legs. That is a defining feature of a giant. And this is why I was unable to find a video, because I wasn't able to find a movie or a TV show or anything that actually showed a giant as it was depicted in the ancient world. They just show a big person because it's way easier to film a regular sized person with a model than it is to make snake-legged humans. So we're going to go over a little bit of some of the textual sources. So you've encountered giants previously in our Hesiod. It was only 1 line, but there's some giant info in there. And then there's some other authors. We are going to return, especially to Apollodorus, later on in the course. But he speaks about giants and a war with the giants. And then Diadorus of Sicily also speaks on the same topic. So these are the 3 that we're going to talk about specifically with giants, but just know that there are other authors out there that talk about giants as well. But the really cool thing about giants, and the reason I really like them, is that they are everywhere in art. We get them on, the specific examples I will show you here is the Pergamon Altar. This is a very, very famous altar that was built in Western Asia Minor. And it currently is in Berlin. It is one of the highlights. If you ever are able to travel internationally, perhaps when COVID is a long distance memory, go to Berlin and go to the Pergamon Museum. It's amazing. There's also mosaics, like this mosaic floor here, and some columns that I will talk about that feature giant iconography. And you get it on gems, you get it on coins, pottery, everywhere. Giants are everywhere, and they're super awesome. So what do our textual sources say? Hesiod is, this is a passage that we actually already talked about. It's really just the 1 line there. I mean, he describes how they are made. So the castration is the process that creates giants, the gigantes. And earth soaked up all the bloody drops that spurted out. Skip a line there. And then gave birth to great giants gleaming in full armor, spears in hand. So giants are warriors. That's basically all Hesiod tells you. He doesn't talk about them having snake legs. He doesn't talk about them. He says they are great. So that may imply that they are large, but you don't actually necessarily get that. They are just there, and they are a product of this castration. But we get a lot more information in the author Apollodorus. I'm going to read this whole section here. Ge is Gaia. So again, whenever you're reading anything that I've assigned to you and you come across an unfamiliar name, there is a reference in the back of the book. The book will tell you that Ge is Gaia, or any one of these multiple names for various deities. Ge, angry at what happened to the Titans, produced the giants by Uranus, unsurpassed in bodily size, in power, unconquerable. They looked frightful in countenance, with thick hair hanging from their heads and chins, means that they had long hair and beards. And they had serpent coils for legs. Apollodorus, right there in the text. According to some, they were born in Phlegria, but according to others in Pallene, they hurled rocks and flaming trees into heaven. Into heaven. I guess that's not actually mentioning Uranus because it's not capitalized. Greatest of them all were Porphyrion and Alcyoneus. Alcyoneus was immortal as long as he fought in the same land where he was born, and he even drove the cattle of Helios out of Erythrea. It had been prophesied to the gods that none of the giants could be killed by gods, but that if a mortal fought as their allies, the giants would die. So these are effectively unbeatable opponents, as long as A, the gods are fighting just as their own, and B, you are fighting them on their home turf. That's kind of what Apollodorus is telling us, and that there is that Gaia is inciting them to rise up and fight because she's mad that the Titans were conquered. So what about Diadorus? This is also about the war with the giants. Just as I talked before about the Titanomachy. Frequently, this is called the Gigantomachy or Gigantomachy. And very often, even in antiquity, these two events get conflated. They kind of turn into one big war against the other. So Diodorus. Zeus also fought other wars against the giants, one in Macedonia near Pellene, and one in Italy on the plain that in antiquity, this is their antiquity, so even older than old, was named the Phlegreon, or the fiery plain, because the place was thought was thoroughly burned. In later times was called the Cumaean plain. The giants were punished by Zeus because of their lawless behavior towards other people, and also because they, relying on their physical superiority and strength, enslaved the people of neighboring lands, because they were not following the laws that he, Zeus, had established about justice, because they were initiating a war against those who were universally considered gods, because of the general benefits they had conferred. So, what can we say, based on these textual sources, what can we say about giants? They're martial. They fight. They're hairy. They have beards and long hair. They are godlike, or amongst the immortals themselves, in their own lands. They're everywhere. They're up here, they're over there, they're down there, and they're lawless. What do you think? Let's pretend for a second that we're not talking about giants in mythology, that we are actually talking about allegory and people groups. Who do you think Greek authors might be referring to with these descriptions? Okay.
Like Germanic tribes, Scandinavia.
Okay, yeah. So if you were to give that a general overarching term, what would you be? What would it be?
People of the war.
Barbarians. Giants are allegorical barbarians. They exist outside of where we are. They do not recognize our laws. They do not recognize our customs. They are hairy. And they will fight you to the death. And if you go to where they're from, you will die because they are undefeatable in their own lands. This is a way that mythology is being deployed. I do not believe that Apollodorus, while writing this, said, "Man, do I hate me some barbarians. I better write up a character that's the barbarian, and then we can talk about how much they suck." That is not the process that is going on here. But Apollodorus knows that barbarians exist and knows that giants exist in the mythological tradition. And the characterization, the way that you talk about and explain these two groups, slowly converge. Not necessarily by Apollodorus himself. He's just the one writing it down. But over time, the way you talk about giants is an awful lot like the way you talk about barbarians. And lo and behold, they become more or less one and the same thing, at least in popular consciousness. So how does this play out in art? Aside from this wonderful mosaic that we've got here of a giant being shot with an arrow, bleeding out. This is part of a frieze from the Pergamon Altar. And this actually follows the Gigantomachy quite closely that Apollodorus writes. Basically, you can identify individual gods and individual named giants and what they're doing to each other. It's really interesting. It's also an absolute masterpiece of, this is from the Hellenistic period, so it's a little bit newer than a lot of the stuff we've been talking about, but I love this work. We've got another scene here of Nike, and I think Athena's on here, and they're in combat with the giants. And it should be very strongly stated: the giants are in no way winning this battle in the depiction. They are just getting stomped. We have another one here. Giant on the ground. I think his head is he's being held by the hair as he's laying basically prone on the ground. This is not a fair fight. And this visualization continues on. I've got the Jupiter giant columns coming up here. These are even later. These are from the Roman period, and they appear in the border regions in the west. So along the Rhine River in the west, the border with barbarians in Germania. And what you have here is Jupiter, or this is Roman Jupiter, or actually a particular manifestation of Roman Jupiter. This is Zeus that we've been talking about, and he is trampling giants. They're underfoot as he rides roughshod over top. These particular columns, I've written about them before. They're super interesting because they also include a whole host of other imagery and iconography that works together. And basically, we talk about giants as allegorical barbarians. These columns not only depict destruction, control over allegorical barbarians at the top, but from top to bottom, they have imagery that shows command over the natural world, command over the cosmos. There are celestial events depicted. There are calendrical events depicted on these columns. It's all about at this time it's the Romans, have command over everything. We are masters of our domain, and we erect these massive columns to advertise to everyone around us how in control we are. So, perhaps a little less fun, at least from a video standpoint, but I think the giants are super interesting. Giants are the martial, hairy, godlike, everywhere, and lawless. They are allegorical barbarians. And the visual summary, there is conflict with barbarism and domination over barbarism. Yep. So this is where we get into theoretical approaches and attempted reconstructions. Very frequently, serpents are understood as liminal creatures. So liminality in anthropological theory is the ability to transition from one to another state, or being kind of in the middle. And serpents are understood as liminal creatures. Snakes are liminal because they burrow underground. So they can go between the underground and the above world. So this is the thinking. All right, so we've got these liminal serpents. And barbarians are between two worlds. They're humans, like us, civilized people in the cities. But they live like animals. They are off in the wilds. They're not civilized. They're not in cities. They're not doing these things. And so the idea, at least the idea I'm telling you, and feel free to disagree, is that the liminality of the serpent is being merged with the liminality of the barbarian in a visual way. And it's not just in art, it's also in writing. Yeah. Could you speak up, please?
I know a lot of like barbarians that have been like art. So is there any kind of like art mythology with like
Not at this time period. So the Norse are much later. Proto-Norse as a linguistic group doesn't evolve until I think the 7th century CE, and we're firmly a few centuries before that. What we do have are other Germanic groups. So the Norse being in this kind of thing. I do not know if there is a Loki in, say, Gothic mythology, at least that we're aware of. That's just beyond my knowledge. Sorry. Yeah. Yeah. So that's also something as interesting to comment on. They're not 50 feet tall. They're not small, as in they're not a tiny unassuming kind of person. They're ripped, at least from the torso up. I don't know what snake muscles look like, but yeah, they're the same size as the gods, and that is an interesting thing. Gods are typically depicted as larger than humans already, and so but not always. So yeah, it's an interesting idea to play with. They're not the modern conception of a giant is not the ancient conception of a giant. That's kind of the long and the short of it. Yeah, and then we'll move on after this. It's definitely a marker of differentiation. Yeah, so it's like these people are not us, and the fastest way to depict someone as not us is to either put them in different clothing that we don't wear, and I don't know if we'll show it much in this class because it's not tremendously pertinent, but if you take any kind of Roman archaeology class throughout a department, barbarians are very often, no matter where they're from, they're very often depicted as wearing a skirt or a kilt and a Phrygian cap. The Smurfs wear Phrygian caps. If that's definitely not relevant anymore. Sorry, I'm old. Regardless, that's a costume of a particular people group that live in Asia Minor. But for the Romans, it's visual shorthand for foreigners, and they throw it up there all the time. Especially if you're fighting Persians, you definitely that's how you depict the Persians over and over and over again, or as women. That's kind of the so anyway, yeah, it's a visual shorthand for they are not us, at least on the most superficial level. It's a very easy way. They got snake legs. I don't think anyone can say that they know somebody with snake legs. Okay, so that was giants. Let's move on to our readings. Who the heck is Xenophanes? And why does his name look so awesome? It's the X. Okay, so he is a late archaic, early classical author. What that means is he somewhat defies the arbitrary time periods that we've created. How dare he? Little did he know he was in a time of great change. I'm sure he actually knew. But he gets labeled, this is such a wonderful thing, he gets labeled as a guy who was philosophizing before this other guy. He's a pre-Socratic philosopher. And so, long story short, that means he's an early Greek philosopher. And there's a few others that are in his category. He's born in Asia Minor in the city of Colophon. So again, across the Aegean, not in on the Greek mainland proper, but there are Greek settlements all over this area. And he writes explicit critiques. He is not messing about. He's going to tell you how he feels. And the reading is a collection of statements. It's fragments. I actually don't know exactly how much of Xenophanes we have preserved, but these fragments are the most common thing that I see cited. in particular, especially to do with mythology. So he calls out Homer and Hesiod by name. He's just like, yeah, they said that the gods do all things. They are beyond reproach, and let's see here. Yeah, theft and adultery and mutual deception, that's human stuff. But the gods are just the perfect thing. He's calling them out because in this later passage, mortals believe that gods are begotten and have clothing, voices, and bodies like their own. He's building a characterization that these are creations, that people have written them down and they look like them. It's probably his most famous here. If oxen and horses and lions had hands so that they could draw and make works of art like men, horses would draw pictures of gods like horses. Oxen like oxen, and they would make their bodies in accordance with the form that they themselves severally possess. So he's saying people made gods, and the gods look like people, and they dress like people, and they act better than people because people made them and people aspire to be them. So he is laying it all out. Gods are dumb, or at least anthropomorphic gods are dumb. He goes on, foreign gods, Ethiopian in Greek conception refers to essentially everything south of Egypt. It is a geographic explanation. But they say their gods are snub-nosed and black. Thracians have gods that are blue-eyed and red-haired. These are characteristics that Xenophanes would ascribe to these peoples, that Ethiopians are snub-nosed and black, and that Thracians have blue eyes and red hair. The gods have not, of course, revealed all things to mortals from the beginning. They're seeking in the course of time, they discover what is better. So gods are capricious. They don't tell you everything all at the same time. And his kind of finale, actually, no, I've got more passages, but anyway, the sum here. There is one God, greatest among gods and human beings, not at all like mortals in form, nor yet in mind. So he is not an atheist. He is not saying that there is no such thing as the divine. It's just that the divine is wholly unlike man, because everything that I've ever heard written about describing gods in mythology, it just sounds like people. So he is formulating a different perspective. Yeah.
I have two questions sort of related to the belief in God. I guess the first one is like, how does the sort of religion of that time compare with, say, like monotheistic religion today in terms of like what did they actually believe? Like, for example, if you ask I mean, there's a lot of different, Christians in the world, but if you ask a lot of like Western modern day sort of Christians, they may say things like, well, these stories in the Bible are metaphors, they're not actually real, maybe angels are really a thing. Like, there's some sort of playfulness with, what is really real and what is just sort of like metaphor and whatnot. So, like, did ancient Greeks really believe that that these stories were real, like they really did happen, or were they in some circles accepted as sort of just like stories that show certain bits of morality or history?
What do you think is the answer?
I mean, based off of this, I mean, there's at least one person who sort of, I was willing to call it out quite explicitly, yet still sort of religious. So, I mean, like, I definitely agree with this author that, like, yeah, clearly all of the gods are incredibly human. If you look at Old Testament God, like, clearly a human being, right? Like, very jealous, spiteful, violent sort of thing. So, I think at that point in time, I don't know, maybe there were people who really believed it. I mean, it's not like they were seeing, Hermes flying around all the time, right? So,
Or were they? So this is something that's very interesting. I'll address the first part of your question first, and then I'll dive into visions and so on. There, as many possible opinions that could exist, there were people to express them, and so there is no one definitive expression of Greek religion. And there are people who would be what we would characterize today as biblical literalists. Yeah, everything in myth absolutely happened, even the stuff that contradicts the other stuff, as Ned Flanders said. There were people that would have absolutely believed that. There were people who would have thought of them as pure allegorical tales for moral instruction, and there were people like Xenophanes who said that is nonsense, and this other thing is the obvious truth. Human diversity in belief and expression of belief is infinite, and it's one of the reasons why I study religion, because it's super, super cool. In terms of actually seeing visions, people interpret things based on their life experience, their lived experience, and we have reasonable evidence that people would have believed they've seen gods do things, or at the very least, they see natural phenomena and they know that that natural phenomena is caused by a god, and thus they have seen the gods work in action. So I wouldn't jump to that conclusion. There are people today, just as there were people then, and there will be people in infinite time from now, as long as there are people that see things and believe that there is something else going on there. And that is a fundamental aspect of the human condition. Not to say that, yeah, that's a longer conversation, but yeah, that answers your question there. Cool. Got a question back. Please project if you can.
I was just wondering, I don't really know that much about the history of religion, but could Xenophanes be seen as like, I don't know, one of the originators of the idea of like the one God and the Abrahamic religion? Like, could his writing have influenced the development of like the Abrahamic religion in the sense that there's one God instead of like not on earth?
I'll parse that out into two parts. He is one of the earliest people that we know of expressing something that we can call as towards monotheism. That there's a lot of qualifiers there, but he does seem to be a relatively early author that is expressing explicit monotheism or something that can go in that direction. In terms of direct contact with Judea or the Hebrew Bible authors, he's later than they are. So, but in the earliest books of the Bible, monotheism is not as explicitly laid out as it is later interpreted to be. Basically, there is one God above all the other gods, and that eventually turns into there is only one God. Everything else that seems godlike is demons or as other kind of manifestations. So that this evolutionary period. So they're not necessarily interrelated or directly dependent upon each other, but they are expressing somewhat similar ideas that could be said to I don't know, people think along these lines from time to time. Hey, I don't want to get too much into this, so if are there any more specific questions on what we've covered already? Hey, if I've missed your hand, sorry. Feel free to come up afterwards or email me. This is Xenophanes further elaborating his perspective on this one God. He sees all, he hears all, he thinks all. So this again kind of building into that. But far from toil, with the thought of his mind, he puts all things in motion. So he's omnipresent, he's omniscient, he's omni. And so this is just, and I have doubled up a slide again. I keep doing that. So this is just give you an idea that his perspective on the gods, his perspective on mythology is explicitly different from what we've covered before. So why might that be, aside from the fact that Xenophanes believed differently than Hesiod? Because that's perfectly reasonable to state. The cultural context. The world Xenophanes is living in is growing. There are new settlements around the Aegean. There's new settlements in the Black Sea. The Greek world is expanding. And as part of that expansion, he's looking at it going, well, we know more about these other peoples. And their gods look like them in the same way that our gods look like us. And that's one of the reasons why I think this is nonsense. And there's this perspective on overturning the previous order. Hesiod was before, I'm the now. That's kind of very mid-century concept. Anyway, that's an old reference. What's the genre that Xenophanes is writing in? Just to kind of make another biblical allusion. You could fit him into something that's known from Near Eastern context called wisdom literature. The Psalms of Solomon is another kind of aspect of wisdom literature. It's phrases and ideas that elucidate truth, that communicate an idea, that communicate truth. And legitimacy. He's going after those that came before him. So he's basically saying, I'm the real thing, you guys are nonsense. And so he is asserting his own legitimacy by talking about how different he is from those that came before him. Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. Influence can work all different directions, but it seems because he is talking about Ethiopians and he's talking about Thracians, his exposure to those outside of the Greek world, because the Greek world is expanding, but also he may have traveled or anything like that. This has led him to the conclusion that the divine is this non-corporeal or at least non-human entity. Okay. So yeah, that's Xenophanes. We have a lot of Plato. So I'm sure you've never heard of this little-known author, Plato. He's like a guy who did some stuff. Yeah. But quite possibly one of the most famous authors from the Greek tradition, immensely influential on European and then by extension North American thought for millennia. His precepts, his ideals are kind of understood as Platonic philosophy. And he's born in Athens. He's most famously a student of Socrates or Socrates, as Bill and Ted said, another old reference because I'm old. And so when he writes in dialogues, a Socratic dialogue, and he speaks in the voice of Socrates very often. If I remember correctly, I'm not a philosophy guy, but if I remember correctly, we have nothing actually written by Socrates. We only have Plato in the voice of Socrates. Yeah. Oh, okay. Well, if it's anything like my lecture notes, that's probably terribly boring to read. But I'm not Socrates. But one thing that Plato did is he adapted myths. So he is, we're going to go into it a little bit here, but he doesn't tell you he's changing things. He just asserts them. And if you don't go along with it, well, that's because you're a big dummy. And I'm Plato or Socrates or whatever, dummy. So I am definitely, this is going to be terrifying. I'm not going to be reading this big chunk. But this is but a taste. The Plato reading in the textbook, you can skim. It's okay. You do not have to memorize every single word on that. What I'm looking for is that we can pull out key themes and key ideas from this material. So definitely not going to read this entire thing. But in the first part of the passage, this is a discussion of creation. Furnishing different means of nourishment for different species. For some it was grass from the earth, others fruit on the trees, and then roots from the ground. Granted flesh of other animals as food. To these carnivores, they can run around and eat the things that are running away from them. And Epimetheus is the guy. Epimetheus is the guy doing this creation. And since he wasn't particularly intelligent, this is Prometheus and the voice of Plato and Socrates critiquing Epimetheus. He wasn't particularly intelligent, so he used up all the capabilities without realizing it. So he just had like a bag of stuff, I mean, if you've ever created a character in an online or in an RPG, you dump all your stats in one particular area and you're like, oh crap. Well, I guess I'm dumb. So you kind of move on with that. Human race was still without endowments, and Epimetheus had no idea what to do. So in comes Prometheus. This is from a dialogue where Prometheus and Epithemius are arguing. Saw that the rest of living animals had their proper share, and humankind was naked and unshod, without bedding or protection. So Prometheus, at a loss to find mankind some means of preservation, stole Hephaestus and Athena's technical wisdom along with fire. So Prometheus sees an injustice and is correcting it. But people didn't get political wisdom, for that resided on the side of Zeus. So Zeus is the purveyor of political wisdom. So what does this passage tell us? It tells us a creation story, and that the creation of animals was perfect. Epithemius wasn't very smart, but he nailed the animals. He gave them everything they could ever want. But human creation was imperfect. And there is a dichotomy, an inbuilt dichotomy between humanity and nature. This imperfection is corrected because humanity is given divine gifts. The technical, and later on they do get the political skills, if I'm not mistaken, from the gods. Prometheus himself is largely consistent with his depiction in Hesiod. We don't get the full narrative of Prometheus stealing the fire, but he's correcting an injustice. But the situation is framed differently. Instead of just seeing people and feeling pity for them, Prometheus knows they were made wrong and is going to set it right. Here's another chunk. And this is where he's calling out Hesiod. He's talking about mythology as the greatest falsehood. And the most important things don't make a fine story. Hesiod telling us about how Uranus behaved, how Kronos punished him for it, and how he was in turn punished by his own son. But even if it were true, injecting some doubt, even if that happened, it should be passed over in silence. It shouldn't be told to foolish young people. And if for whatever reason you got to talk about it, you do it in secret, you do it with a sacrifice, and you keep it to only an elect few. This is dangerous stuff. Such stories are hard to deal with. They shouldn't be told in our city. This is a dialogue about the perfect city. A young person shouldn't hear it, or a young person hearing these stories committing the worst crimes is doing nothing out of the ordinary because they're just doing the same thing as the first and greatest gods. So it's dangerous to talk about these stories because they are a model for those stupid kids that are over there. So what does Plato have to say about Hesiod? Mythology is questionable, even if it were true. So he's injecting doubt. Young people can't be trusted. Them youngins, foolish young people. Mythology is dangerous, told to few, pledged to secrecy, and you have to do a sacrifice in order to hear it. This is very, very interesting. Yeah. Yeah, so if you were going from the black and white stuff that I put up, I did mention that may differ from time to time from the made slides afterwards. And if you are going from the color ones, if you printed those out, I also just changed them 5 minutes before class. So I will be updating the PDF of the color slides so that they match these ones. But the black and white ones, since it's only for note taking in class, it doesn't do anybody any good after class. But it's, oh, I see. Yeah, no, the color ones will be updated afterwards. I was updating it. I wanted to add more context instead of just these big old Chungus text boxes. So gods behave immorally, and this is a danger to our youth. Another big old chungus here. There's one line I think I wanted to pop out of this. Yeah, just in the middle there. We won't allow poets to say that the punished are made wretched and that it was a god who made them so. That's kind of the most important thing to pull out of this. Basically, mythology tells cruel stories, and it seems like it's random who gets punished, and that's not okay. Because only the wicked should suffer. And this is kind of echoing on Aeschylus, that you should get punishment if you do bad things, and that's it. If you're being punished and you don't think you did bad, you're actually a bad person. That's the way that's backwards thinking works. And so Plato doesn't like the idea of storytelling where the gods are capricious. This needs to be corrected. The gods will follow their own rules. This is heavily censored ideas. He does finish off. These stories are not pious, not advantageous to us, and not consistent with one another. That definitely sounds like a Karen. He's very upset with myth. It's all over the place. How dare this art go in art on its own? People are going to get the wrong ideas. You thought those other ones looked big. There you go. Go ahead and read that. The broad thing here. I don't know why I threw these up here. Just to show you that this is what you should be reading, I guess. That's terrifying. Anyway, I'm going to skip over reading it because I do give the summary here. There's that section talks about moderation. Plato is really, really against the idea of extremes. Human beings become happiest if they don't go to these extremes. Luxury and excess. Well, maybe if you're a god, it leads to you just straight up eating your kids. That seems to be an interesting argument, but that's fine. And if misfortune follows you, it's your own fault for living to excess. Look at and he talks about the those born on the ground, the giants, the gigantes. They had a miserable life. They were tortured and battered around, and now they have a moderate outlook. So just everyone, if they were to have a miserable life, would be more moderate. Please ignore the fact that I'm fabulously wealthy and haven't worked a day in my life. This is another kind of moralizing screed, or screed is too strong, but it's a moralizing text telling you that if you live to excess, you're going to be punished, and it's your own damn fault, and everyone should just chill out. So what do we know about Plato from these big, big blocks of text? Well, much like Xenophanes before him, Plato also lives in a time of change. But in more than just new settlements, there's also foreign conflicts. Big, big wars all over the known world. And this overturns established orders, and it contributes to a reshaping of the world. And Plato is in this world where you can actually just remake things. And that's what he's doing in these dialogues is, well, if I'm going to design the perfect place, I'll do it in words. The genre context, these Socratic dialogues, I find them to be personally quite onerous to read, but they lead you to truth. There's a trail of breadcrumbs that you're supposed to follow along until eventually the person who is the foil is led to the ultimate conclusion. This makes them very, very long. In terms of legitimacy, like I said, Plato just asserts things. He just states them. And if you don't understand or you don't like it, again, you're just a big dummy. And everyone who came before him is a big dummy, and everyone who disagrees with him is a big dummy. And that, I'm not in the philosophy department. That's my summary of Plato. So, what did we do today? We talked about giants. We talked about two authors that recontextualize myth, explicitly critique those that came before them, and in some cases try to supplant what existed before with their own new creation. That's it for today. Have a great weekend. Readings shall be posted, and a new quiz will be up on Sunday.